For decades, a single planting of asparagus could feed a family for a generation. 20 years, 25 spears per crown, season after season. In 1990, America grew over 100 million pounds of it. Today, U.S. production has collapsed by 80%, and the backyard beds are mostly gone. Why did a plant so reliable become almost invisible? And what did we really lose and gain when it happened? The answer begins with a promise few crops could ever keep. In the world of vegetables, few promises matched what asparagus could offer. A single planting, tucked into the far corner of a garden, could provide fresh spears for 20 years or more. Horticulture bulletins from the 1950s described asparagus as the ultimate investment. Set crowns once, wait 2 or 3 seasons for the roots to mature, and then harvest a steady crop, about 25 spears from each crown every spring for decades. The plant's deep, fleshy roots store energy through the summer fern stage, sending up new shoots each year with almost no need to replant. Extension agents called it a perennial backbone of the American garden, a crop that rewarded patience with abundance. Old seed catalogs boasted of varieties like Mary Washington and Martha Washington, promising harvests that would outlast the family diet, maybe even the family car. In many towns, it was common for a backyard bed to outlive its original gardener, passed down like a fruit tree or a patch of rhubarb. The culture of asparagus was built on this long view, an understanding that some rewards required waiting, but would come back season after season with little more than weeding and a bit of springtime cutting. For generations, this was the quiet logic of the home garden. Plant once, harvest for decades, and know that some things in life were meant to last. By 1990, the United States stood at the height of its asparagus era. Washington State alone produced about 102 million pounds of asparagus on nearly 30,000 acres, according to industry data. Fields stretched across the Columbia Basin and Yakima valleys, feeding a network of canneries and freezing plants that ran day and night during harvest. In towns like Dayton, Walla Walla, and Toppenish, seasonal workers poured into vegetable processing plants. Each spring, hundreds of jobs depended on the smooth arrival of wagon loads of freshly cut spears. California added nearly 28,000 acres of its own, much of it in the rich soils of the San Joaquin Delta. Michigan's fields along the lakeshore contributed thousands more, making the United States the world's leading producer of green asparagus. A cannery manager in Walla Walla might have watched the lines run at full tilt, spears moving from field to brine in a matter of hours. The work was hard, but the scale was impressive, so much so that for a time, asparagus was as much an economic engine as a garden staple. These were the years when American-grown asparagus filled supermarket shelves and pantry cans from coast to coast, supported by a workforce whose livelihoods depended on the rhythms of this perennial crop. In 1991, the Andean Trade Preference Act opened the United States market to duty-free asparagus from Peru. The policy's stated aim was to encourage farmers in the Andes to grow legal crops instead of coca, with asparagus among the products singled out for tariff elimination. Before these changes, imported asparagus faced tariffs as high as 21% for much of the year, enough to keep most foreign product out of American supermarkets except during brief windows. With the new law, those tariffs dropped to 0 for qualifying Peruvian shipments. Just 3 years later, the North American Free Trade Agreement phased out tariffs on Mexican asparagus as well. According to trade economists at the USDA, these agreements created a level playing field for foreign growers who could now ship asparagus into the United States market year-round without paying import duties. The intent was public and debated, written into law, and tracked by agencies like the Government Accountability Office. By the mid-1990s, retailers and wholesalers began sourcing more product from Peru and Mexico, drawn by the lower prices and the promise of a steady, off-season supply. The mechanics were simple: remove the tariff, and the door to the American market stood wide open. According to USDA statistics, U.S. asparagus acreage dropped from around 83,000 acres in 2000 to roughly 20,000 by 2020. That is a 75% reduction in just 2 decades. Washington, once the nation's powerhouse, saw its own fields shrink from about 30,000 acres in 1990 to only 4,500 acres by the late 2010s, a loss of more than 80%. The volume followed suit, from over 100 million pounds at the peak to just above 20 million pounds in recent years. The impact reached beyond the fields. By 2005, the last major asparagus cannery in Washington closed its doors, and processing lines that once employed hundreds of seasonal workers each harvest went quiet. California, too, felt the pressure. State records show that asparagus acreage there fell from about 20,000 acres in 2007 to just over 5,000 by 2019. As fields were plowed under and contracts disappeared, the infrastructure built around domestic asparagus, canneries, freezing plants, seasonal jobs dwindled to a fraction of its former scale. These numbers reflect a structural contraction, not just a bad year or two, but a lasting transformation of the American asparagus industry. Fresh asparagus, once a fleeting spring specialty, now fills supermarket shelves all year. According to USDA trade data, Americans consume 500 million pounds of asparagus annually, over double what the country used in 1990. Today, about 80 to 90% of that total arrives from Peru and Mexico. Imports from Peru fill the August through December window, when United States fields are dormant, while Mexico supplies the late winter and early spring. This 12-month availability would have been unthinkable in the days when local harvests lasted just 6 to 8 weeks. A United States trade analyst explains that these changes resulted directly from public policy. The Andean Trade Preference Act, and NAFTA, lowered tariffs, making it possible for foreign growers to ship asparagus into the United States at prices that undercut most domestic supply. The effect for shoppers was immediate. As imports rose, real prices at the supermarket held steady or even declined slightly, especially when adjusted for inflation. Asparagus, once a rare treat outside spring, became an everyday option in the produce aisle. The numbers tell a clear story: greater supply, lower prices, and more weeks of fresh asparagus on the table. For consumers, the shift meant less dependence on the calendar and more freedom to enjoy a vegetable that used to be strictly seasonal. What was lost in local fields was gained in the consistency and affordability of the supermarket aisle. Garden centers today are filled with annuals, petunias, tomatoes, peppers, plants that start fast and finish in a single season. According to industry surveys, nearly 97% of nursery vegetable stock is now annual. The perennial bed, once a mainstay of American backyards, has become a rarity. Horticulture historians point to the economics behind this shift. Annuals guarantee that customers return every spring. Perennials, like asparagus, with a lifespan of 2 decades or more, are a one-time sale. Retailers have little incentive to stock plants that do not need replacing. But the story runs deeper than business models. Asparagus requires patience. Extension bulletins still note the 2 to 3 year wait before a new planting yields a full harvest. In a culture that favors instant results, that feels like an eternity. New gardeners, often working with smaller yards or moving more frequently, rarely choose a crop that demands a permanent bed and years of waiting. Surveys from land-grant universities show a steady drop in questions about perennial vegetables. Fewer home gardeners ask about maintaining asparagus beds, and fewer nurseries carry crowns in bulk. The knowledge that once passed from neighbor to neighbor, how to dig a trench, how to mulch in dates of fall, have faded with the generation that grew up expecting these rituals. The plant itself has not changed. The biology remains as reliable as ever. But the intersection of retail economics, shifting lifestyles, and lost expertise has made the 20-year plant almost invisible in the modern American backyard. Today, more than 80% of America's asparagus arrives from fields thousands of miles away, year-round, but at the cost of vanished local roots. What we grow and what we forget are never separate. The plant's promise remains, even if the memory of it is fading. Thanks for watching.